Okay, imagine this. It's the early 1900s, and you're a neuroscientist. You've just discovered the brain uses electrical signals to communicate. Pretty amazing, huh?
Truly groundbreaking.
But there's a catch. No one has any idea how these signals actually work.
It was a complete mystery, like
Yeah.
stumbling upon a radio wave from another planet with no way to decode it.
It's mind-boggling. That's why this deep dive is so fascinating. We're tackling the work of Hodgkin and Huxley and their model that finally cracked the code of the action, potential the language of your neurons.
A monumental leap forward in neuroscience. Before their work, the main theory from a scientist named Bernstein suggested that nerve impulses happen because the cell membrane basically went neutral during an impulse.
So like a gate swinging open, letting everything flood in and out.
Precisely. Yeah. But this theory had some holes. It couldn't explain certain things like how the electrical signal in a neuron actually reverses charge for a moment during what we call an action potential.
And this is where things get interesting. Enter the squid axon. Not exactly the first thing that comes to mind with brain research.
You'd be surprised. Their axons, the long nerve fibers transmitting those electrical signals, were a game changer.
Game changer. How so?
Significantly larger than human neurons, so much easier to study. But surprisingly similar in how they generate electrical impulses.
What a stroke of luck for those pioneering neuroscientists. So it was Cole and Curtis who set the stage for Hodgkin and Huxley's breakthrough, right? With their own work on those squid axons.
Absolutely. They made a key observation. During an action potential, the membrane's conductance doesn't just increase a little, it explodes. A major red flag that something way more dynamic was happening than Bernstein's theory had ever accounted for.
So not just opening the floodgates, something was causing a surge. This really set the stage for Hodgkin and Huxley to dig deeper, wouldn't you say?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Their work completely revolutionized our understanding of the neuron.
So they had these giant squid axons, way easier to study, but what exactly did Hodgkin and Huxley do with them?
This is where their ingenuity really shines through. They didn't just want to observe the action potential, they figured out a way to basically take it apart piece by piece.
Okay, now you've got my attention. How do you dissect an electrical signal?
They invented a technique called voltage clamping. It allowed them to manipulate the voltage across the neuron's membrane, think of it like a dimmer switch, and very precisely measure the resulting electrical currents.
So instead of just watching the action potential happen, they could actually control it.
Exactly. And by doing that, by changing the ion concentrations inside and outside the axon, they were able to isolate the different electrical currents that make up the action potential.
Okay, hold on, back up a sec. They found multiple currents. I thought it was just one big electrical signal.
That was the prevailing thought. But they proved it was much more dynamic than that. They showed there were two main currents, each carried by a different type of ion.
Wait a minute. Two currents? Two types of ions? Are we talking about sodium and potassium here?
Bingo. They demonstrated that the rapid inward current, that's the one causing that swift surge of the action potential, was carried by sodium ions. And that slightly slower outward current, the one that brings the neuron back to its resting state, that was all potassium.
Hold on, let me get this straight. We've got sodium rushing in, causing the electrical spike, and then potassium flowing out to calm things back down. Sounds almost too simple.
It does, doesn't it? But trust me, this discovery was a game changer. Before Hodgkin and Huxley, nobody even knew these specific ionic currents existed, let alone that they were the key players in the action potential.
So they basically redefined how we understand the electrical language of the brain, right?
Exactly. Their work established what we now call the ionic hypothesis. The flow of these specific ions, sodium and potassium, across the neuron's membrane is what generates those electrical signals. They crack the code. But hold on. It gets even more impressive.
You mentioned this gets even more impressive. What could top cracking the code of how neurons communicate?
They didn't stop at just identifying these currents. They went a step further. And this is where it goes from groundbreaking science to, well, legendary.
Okay, now I have to know. What's more impressive than figuring out how neurons talk to each other?
They've built a mathematical model. And not just any model. This is the Hodgkin-Huxley model, considered one of the most successful, maybe the most successful mathematical model in all of biology.
Mathematical model. See, that's where my brain starts to check out a little. I get the groundbreaking science part, but why is a mathematical model such a big deal?
Because they didn't just organize their findings. They created a tool that could actually simulate a neuron's electrical behavior. Imagine being able to predict the electrical language of a brain cell.
Wait, so they didn't just describe what they were seeing, they found a way to replicate it, to predict how a neuron would behave.
Exactly. At the core of it, Their model describes these sodium and potassium currents as if they're flowing through separate specialized channels in the neuron's membrane. Then they took it even further, adding in what are called gating variables.
Gating variable. Okay, you're going to have to break that one down for me.
Imagine each of these ion channels is like a doorway for sodium and potassium to pass through, right? But these aren't just any doorways. They're like those fancy automatic doors that know when you're coming or going. They open and close depending on the electrical voltage and how much time has passed. Those are the gating variables. They determine if a channel is open or closed at any given moment.
So depending on the electrical signals the neuron is receiving, these channels are either saying, sodium, come on in, or potassium, everybody out.
A perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And here's the truly remarkable part. Hodgkin and Huxley captured this entire process mathematically. Plug in different conditions like changes in voltage or time, and their model would accurately predict how the neuron would react.
So not only did they unravel the mysteries of the action potential, they created a tool that could predict how a neuron would behave even in circumstances they hadn't tested yet. That is some seriously impressive science.
It really was a turning point. They could predict incredibly complex phenomena, like how a neuron becomes less excitable after firing a signal, something called the refractory period. It proved that their model had truly captured the fundamental principles of neural communication.
It's like they gave us the keys to understanding the electrical language of the brain. But even with all of this, there's still more to the story, right?
Oh, absolutely. The impact of their model went way beyond just those initial experiments. For instance, their model actually predicted something called gating charge movement. Basically, for those ion channels to open and close, tiny charged particles within the membrane itself actually have to move around.
Hold on, so they're saying those channels don't just magically open and close. There's an actual physical mechanism behind it.
Exactly. And years later, with more advanced techniques like single-channel recording, scientists confirmed that gating charge movement is a real thing, just as Hodgkin and Huxley's model had predicted. Talk about solidifying their work as the foundation for understanding the molecular machinery of the brain.
It makes you wonder what other secrets are still hidden within those intricate electrical conversations happening in our brains. From those giant squid axons to the very essence of our thoughts and perceptions, what an incredible journey. That's it for our deep dive into the groundbreaking work of Hodgkin and Huxley. We hope you've enjoyed exploring the amazing world of the brain and the intricate electrical language that makes us who we are. Until next time.